We know that when a tzaddik passes away, all of the work that tzaddik invested in throughout their lifetime reaches its culmination at the point where the neshama leaves this world. And the timing of when the neshama leaves the world and how it coincides with the parasha is very telling, gives us an insight into what this is all about. How come then did the Alter Rebbe pass away while on the run? And specifically in Parashat Shemos, which is all about being in Golus, what's the link between the Alter Rebbe, his life work, and surviving and thriving in Golus? The Tzemach Tzedek schreibt, wegen des Stalkus von Alter Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek writes about the passing of the Alter Rebbe, nach Beschreibung bekitzer die Tunen, was der Alter Rebbe hat durchgemacht. After the Tzemach Tzedek briefly describes all of the chaos and difficulty that the Alter Rebbe went through on his run from the French, from Napoleon's forces, bis zu sein Ankommen in Dorf Piena, until eventually he reached the village of Piena, which, according to the Tzemach Tzedek, happened Erev Shabbos Vayishlach Tov Kofayin Gimel, Erev Shabbos Parshas Vayishlach 1812. As motzei Shabbos Kodesh to Shemos, after that, the Tzemach Tzedek writes motzei Shabbos Kodesh of Parshas Shemos, which was Chov Gimel, the 23rd of the month, Orloch of Dalet Teves, now on the eve of the 24th of the month of Teves, Kachatzois Shah Yudalef, halfway after 11 p.m., Nishba Aron HaKodesh Mor Yisrael Mashiach Hashem V'chulei, the Ark of Hashem, the illuminator of the Jewish people, the anointed of Hashem, was, so to speak, captured from us and taken on high. In other words, reporting when the Alter Rebbe passed away. Now, we know that any special occasion on the Jewish calendar, including special dates in the lives of tzaddikim, including and probably most importantly the days of the birth and passing of tzaddikim, are always related to the message and theme of the parasha that is read at the time around this particular event. And that's going to be relevant here too. But there is something actually that the Alter Rebbe made a big deal about when he said, as man darf von dem Alter Rebbe, something the Alter Rebbe taught us, as man darf leben mit der Zeit, that we have to live with the times, which meant mit der Parashas HaShavua, we have to not only learn but also live with the parasha of the week. And therefore, there has to be a link between the parasha and the events. In this case, the passing of the Alter Rebbe. Hagam, as the Stalkus von Alter Rebbe is given Orloch of Dalet Teves, even though, as the Tzemach Tzedek points out, when did the Alter Rebbe pass away? On the eve of going into the 24th of Teves, which was motzei Shabbos, was is gefallen in Yom Aleph from Parashas Va'era, which means it's technically the first day of the week of Parashas Va'era, and maybe that's the parasha we should be looking at. Davon aber, was der Tzemach Tzedek hat sich nicht begnügend mit einzeichnen bloß im Zman von Orloch of Dalet Teves. But look how the Tzemach Tzedek described it. He didn't simply satisfy himself with telling us that it was the eve of the 24th of Teves. Und er will nicht mit Mosef sein dem Tag von Woch, motzei Shabbos Kodesh. And not only did he add to that it was motzei Shabbos, but he adds something else. Nor geht euch zu, as is given by motzei Shabbos Kodesh to Shmois, that Tzemach Tzedek emphasizes that it was motzei Shabbos Kodesh of Shmois. And then he also still tells us that Shabbos Shemos was the 23rd of Teves. So the Tzemach Tzedek is very clearly linking the Shabbos and the parasha of Shemos to the story of the Alter Rebbe's passing, and we have to understand why. It's pretty clear from what the Tzemach Tzedek is saying that the Alter Rebbe's passing is linked to, and actually fundamentally linked to Parashat Shemos. Let's understand how and why. Aber frat, as the Genoyas man Stalkus is given with the Tzemach Tzedek schreibt, Kachatzei Shal Yudalef. Especially when we know that Tzemach Tzedek gives us pretty much the precise time of the Alter Rebbe's passing, 11:30 in the evening. Was benegea kama dinim v'inyanim haben doch kiyodua die shows from motzei Shabbos Kodesh farchatzei zelayla shayches zu Shabbos. We know that there are various halachic considerations which consider motzei Shabbos until midnight as being tethered to and linked to Shabbos. Is es memela bazunder bahvais if dem shaychos mit the Stalkus to Parashas Shemos dafka. The fact that the Tzemach Tzedek made sure we knew that the Alter Rebbe passed away before midnight is linking it yet again to Parashas Shemos, telling us that Parashas Shemos has a lot of insight to offer into what the Alter Rebbe's life work is all about, because that's the culmination at the time of his passing. So what's Parashas Shemos about? What sets Parashas Shemos apart from the parashas that both precede and follow it? In fact, Parashas Shemos is quite unique in this particular respect, because the teichel from Parashas Shemos is Golus v'Shibud Mitzrayim. The focus of Parashas Shemos is all about the exile and the subjugation of the Jewish people in Egypt. Because in the parashas was Parashas Shemos, the parashas that preceded at the end of Chumash Bereshis, which is Vayigash and Vayechi, from Far Shibud Mitzrayim. Yes, they do describe the Jewish people, the children of Israel, living in Mitzrayim, but it's before they're slaves. Even though they had already gone through a spiritual and physical descent to enter into an immoral place like Mitzrayim, but they're not yet enslaved to Mitzrayim. As the famous Medrash tells us, as long as one of the Shvatim was still alive, the Egyptians did not enslave the Jewish people, and of course, until the end of Vayechi, all of the Shvatim are alive. That's the contrast between Shmois and the parashas that preceded, because they're before the Tzoros begin. Now let's look at the parashas that follow it. And the parashas was Noch Shmois, Parashas Va'ira und Boy, the next two parashas which follow Shmois. Hagam azoichen zei wird gered wegen die Tkufas Hashibut von denen in Mitzrayim. Yes, Parashas Va'ira, and to an extent Parashas Boy, are describing things that happened to the Jewish people while they were slaves in Egypt. Von deswegen sind sich Shainon in Parashas Va'ira die Zeichens auf dem Monet von der Geula. But Parashas Va'ira is already a whole different mindset. The signs of Geula are now becoming apparent. Das ist ein Moifsim, was der Eibusher hat bewiesen, und die Makkos, was hat gebracht auf die Mitzrayim. Firstly, we see the signs that the Eibusher gives Moshe to share with the Jewish people, telling them that they're going to leave Mitzrayim. And then, of course, there are the actual plagues themselves, which dismantle Mitzrayim. So it's not that harshness of being slaves, because the slave machinery is actually falling apart. The Shibud Guf is done given gringer, and as we know, the slavery itself became far lighter and easier during that period. And the Gemara Rosh Hashanah tells us that already from the Rosh Hashanah before Yetzias Mitzrayim, there was no longer slavery at all. So Va'era is talking about a far softer experience of what Parashat Shmos is describing. Und as kam in Parashas Boy, was wird schon erzählt wegen der Geula befeuert, and needless to say, Parashas Boy is nowhere near like Parashas Shmos, because that's actually the story of the Exodus itself. So what's unique in Shmos? Dagegen in Parashas Shmos, what distinguishes Shmos from the other parashas is, what the Teichel for the ganze Sedra B'Shtei from Protim in Gedel L'Koshi Hashibut. The entire parasha is telling us details of how difficult and how severe the slavery was, beasts to them, telling and safe from the desert until you get to the end of the parasha where things hit their absolute rock bottom. As Paro had where Paro says we're no longer giving the Jewish slaves raw materials, and but we're increasing the intensity of the work that they have to do. It was so bad that even Moshe complained to the Eibusher, from the moment I came to Paro to speak up on behalf of the Jewish people, on your instruction, life has only gotten worse for the Jewish people. So what is Shmos? It is the thick and intensity of the Golus. Und damit kennt man der Hefscher, die Sheiches von die Stalkers von Alter Rebbe zu Parashat Shmos. Knowing that about Parashat Shmos will help us better understand the correlation between the Alter Rebbe's passing and the message of Parashat Shmos. Because wie der Mond früher ist, die Stalkers von Alter Rebbe gewinnen sich in Golus. Firstly, practically, when did and where did Alter Rebbe pass away? In his own state of exile. As the Tzemach Tzedek says, they were running from the French, they were refugees, and they were metultal, they were in a state of disconcertion, things were not settled. And the Rebbe gives a first-hand account of how difficult things were and how chaotic it was. So the Alter Rebbe is in a state of Golus when he passes away. That's quite apt to link to Parashat Shmos, which is about the intensity of Golus Mitzrayim. But there's something far deeper here too. We know very famously from Tanya what the Alter Rebbe writes about the passing of a tzaddik. What happens is that at the moment of a tzaddik's passing, all of his investment, all of his avodah, all of his efforts, all come together and culminate. And that generates this tremendous revelation of divine energy into the world at the time that the tzaddik leaves the world. So we know that every single event that happens is obviously directed in detail by Hashem. And that's true of anything that happens in the world. So it must be much more so the case when it's an event related to a tzaddik, and not just any tzaddik, a nasi hador. As das, was der Alter Rebbe is davon verstandig, so we can understand, as das, was der Alter Rebbe's Histalkus is given in Golus. The fact that the Eibusher designed it, that the Alter Rebbe should leave this world while a refugee, while running from the French, while in exile, is das a beweis of dem Kesher pnimistika shaychas zwischen Meise v'seirose v'avidose von dem Bala Ilula. That indicates that whatever the Alter Rebbe's primary investment of avodah is about, which is what's going to reach its climax and reach its revelation at the time the Alter Rebbe leaves our world. That must be something which is directly related to the value and advantage of us doing things for Hashem, serving Hashem, specifically in Golus. Und davon ist nicht stalschel geworden in Gashmis, als ein Stalkus ist gewesen in Golus Kipshutai. So therefore, because the Alter Rebbe represents the greatness of serving Hashem in a state of Golus, that translated and evolved into the physical experience of his Stalkus, which is the culmination of all this avodah, dafka being in a state of Golus. So let's understand, what did the Alter Rebbe do that is so much about this energy of Golus, and I guess let's understand what the energy of avodah and Golus is all about. In fact, this is so relevant to the Alter Rebbe's life that the last time the Alter Rebbe has the opportunity to physically celebrate the Geula of Yutas Kislev, which is obviously the most pivotal moment in the Alter Rebbe's avodah, was the Alter Rebbe hat geproved b'chaim chayus b'almadein, which the Alter Rebbe celebrated in this world, is given in dem Golus ort von seine Stalkus, happened while he was in Golus. Warum wir demont früher Divrat Tzemach Tzedek is biyos in a piano given Shabbos Vayishlach, because as noted, that Tzemach Tzedek told us that the Alter Rebbe and his entourage came to this little town of Piena on Erev Shabbos Vayishlach, was das given for Yutas Kislev, which was before Yutas Kislev. You may see a note from the Frierdiker Rebbe that indicates otherwise. The Rebbe says that was probably an editorial mistake, and it's not what the Frierdiker Rebbe wrote. But bald as Yutas Kislev, there are schon Chassidus is the Nekuda Hatichene from Ma'aseh v'Seiros v'Avidosim from Mbala Ilula. Needless to say, Yutas Kislev, which celebrates the Rosh Hashanah of Chassidus and the proliferation of Chassidus in an unprecedented way, that is the core of what the Alter Rebbe's avodah is all about. And that principle of spreading and teaching Chassidus is something which is very much about how we serve Hashem in Golus, as we'll explain, and as we have already touched on. Let's do Yutas Kislev. That's why the Alter Rebbe's final celebration of Yutas Kislev in the physical realm was das mein bemele der herste Ile von der Yom Nade betkufes Chayev V'Almadein. If it's the last Yutas Kislev that the Alter Rebbe experienced, then it is the highest variant of Yutas Kislev that the Alter Rebbe ever experienced. Because as the Alter Rebbe tells us, every year in Rosh Hashanah there's a brand new energy that enters this world, a greater light that has never been in this world before. That's what happens on Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah of Chassidus, surely the same thing. And where did the Alter Rebbe celebrate it? Given in Golus, in a state of exile. That's not accidental. It is core to understanding what Chassidus is all about. In demselben Golus hat was is given seine Stalkus, and it wasn't just some place of exile. It was the destination where the Alter Rebbe eventually passed away in exile. Because that is the location and that is the time in which all of the Alter Rebbe's avodah is at its highest, most powerful state. What does all of that mean? How is Chassidus in its highest state, specifically in Golus? As the Teichen from Parasha Shemos is Golus v'Shibud Mitzrayim. Well, in order to understand that, let's go back to the Parasha, because we said that the Parasha is always going to be illustrative and help us understand what's going on in the world. So the Parasha is Shemos, which is all about the intensity of the Golus in Mitzrayim, and there's something very intriguing about Shemos representing Golus Mitzrayim, because the name of the Parasha is supposed to obviously capture the core theme of what the parasha is about. The name Shemos actually seems to undermine the intensity of the Golus in three different ways. Scheingret Filmol, as the Namen von der Seder liegt ois mit sich, dem Inhalt von der ganzen Seder, the Rebbe has pointed out numerous times that the name of a parasha encapsulates within it the core meaning and theme of the parasha. Is es nicht verstanden, in which case Shemos doesn't seem to make sense. Das, was der Wort Shemos enthält in sich, ist der Hefech von denen von Golus Mitzrayim. The name Shemos would seem to actually encapsulate the exact opposite message of Golus Mitzrayim in three different ways. Val, Aleph, number one, Chazal Zogen v'Fried Demont. We've already mentioned that the Medrash tells us, as Kolzman Shayu Echad Mem Kaim Me'isan Sheyodin Mitzrayim, Lo Shibdu HaMitzrim LiYisrael. As long as any of the people who had been part of the original 70 who came down to Mitzrayim were still alive, the Egyptians did not enslave the Jewish people. In which case, as the von Shemos B'Yisrael Aboy Mitzrayim, the parasha starts off by telling us the names, and that's what the Shemos is from, the names of the people who entered Mitzrayim, have gotten into Lazantem Shibud for Mitzrayim. We're actually listing the people who prevented the Golus. How's that the name that you use for a parasha, which describes the Golus in its worst scenario, and yet the names that are alluded to in the parasha, the Shemos B'nai Yisrael, are actually the people who saved them from Golus. Number two, Oich. Die Besonderheit Gosche von dem Wort Shmois Kufa, also another message of Shmois, das was der Eibusher hat sich noch einmal gezählt wie Shmois, and the fact that the Eibusher recounted the Jewish people and by name. We know the principle of when Hashem counts us, and particularly by name. It's not Rashi tells us it's Lehidiachi Basan, because the Eibusher wants to show how cherished and beloved we are to him. Also, the Hevach von Golus v'Keish Hashibut von the Eden. If the Eibusher is illustrating his love for us, that also seems to be the exact opposite of what Golus is all about. And that's the message of the parasha. How does Shmois, illustrating Hashem's love, represent the parasha, which indicates Hashem allowing us to suffer? And lastly, Gimel, the Shemes, Zainen, Gor, Kamaim Chazal, Hashem, Geulas, Yisrael, Nizkiru Kan. There's also a medrash that tells us that how were the Jews, or what was the relevance of the names of the Jewish people who are listed over here at the beginning of Pasha Shmois, names that represent Geula. So how does Shmois, which seems to have so many positive connotations, and connotations specifically related to either obstructing Golus or celebrating Geula, how does that become the name of a parasha, which is all about the intensity of Golus? So let's understand what is the unique mode of service of Hashem that happens in Golus, because that will actually lead us to an answer. Opinion. Says Yaduas, Elohim, the avodah von Zman Golus b'shteit therein, and Chassidus it explains that the value and advantage of how we serve Hashem during Golus is because the nature of Golus is to elicit our sacrifice for Hashem. In order to have that degree of sacrifice and dedication to Hashem, Mesiras Nefesh, would mean that we have accessed the Yechida dimension of our soul, otherwise known as the essence of our soul. Golus elicits the core of our being. Because Yechida, or the essence of the soul, dort und in der Matze, wo es fällt, der Benehmen herrschen Elikus, mit Tzadikeiches Agluim von der Neshama. Because typically, when does a person call on their deepest core self in order to serve Hashem? When they don't feel a conscious degree of either love of Hashem or enthusiasm for Judaism or an awareness of Hashem in their lives. In other words, when a person engages the core, the essence of their neshama, their relationship with Hashem is not built on what they feel, what they understand, what they appreciate, but on the core fact that they're Jewish, and that is immutable. And therefore, so therefore, in a time where Judaism was beautiful because there was a Beis Hamikdash, and everybody could experience revelation of godliness. So what motivated Jewish people to do what Hashem wants, to serve Hashem? Inspiration, enthusiasm, love, awareness, because that was their experience. They could actually relate to and experience and sense the Eibishter in ways that relate to their mind. They could understand godliness, understand that godliness is real, and they felt that they had a true inspiration, true passion for Hashem. So that means that it created the kind of avodas Hashem which is rational and passionate and something we could relate to and feel. So you don't, at that point, in that way, sense serving Hashem because of your Yechida Shebenefesh, because who needs the Yechida Shebenefesh? I relate to this, I get it, I feel it, it talks to me. Now that's in the wonderful time of the Beis Hamikdash, Dafka in Zman HaGolus, but when you're in a time of Golus, when godly energy is blinded from us, as we say, like the Pasuk in Tehillim says, we don't see signs of the Eibusher, we don't know when it will ever be resolved. And there are many obstructions and many concealments and many obstacles to doing what Hashem wants. It's specifically in those circumstances where we lack that awareness and that excitement and that passion and that understanding that they had in the time of the Beis Hamikdash. Then we've got to dig deep and we've got to get in touch with the core of our neshama to be able to empower ourselves to overcome all of those obstacles to doing what Hashem wants. That's where we have to confront the fact that our relationship to Hashem is at the core of our being and it's not the result of things that inspire or talk to us. That's what happened and was actually the purpose of the Golus in Mitzrayim and by extension of any Golus at any time in our history. Golus squeezes out from within us the essence connection that sits at the very core of who we are and cannot be undone. And that's the connection we have to Hashem. And that level of sacrifice, that awareness that this is who I am and it can never be switched out and can never be mitigated, that prepared us to be able to receive the Torah. Where the objective of Matan Torah isn't just to give us information, but to give us a mechanism by which we could bring godliness down into the most physical, arbitrary things. And through our observance of Torah mitzvahs, we could turn this lowly physical world into a place that accommodates Hashem in the most profound way. Which is the essence of Torah. The essence of Torah is not to be religious. The essence of Torah is not to conform to a whole set of laws. The essence of Torah is to marry godliness to this world. So how do you access the essence of Torah? Well, first you have to access the essence of your neshama. Where does a person access the essence of their neshama? In a time and place where godliness is not something we appreciate and something that we feel. And so we have to dig really deep. That's the value of Golus. Another principle of what the greatness is of serving Hashem, specifically in the time of Golus, which means we're in a time frame that godliness is not observable. It's not real to us. And in spite of the darkness, we specifically arouse the depths of our neshama, the essence of our neshama. That is Merumas in dem Inyan von Shmois. That is exactly what the name of this parasha, Shmois, illustrates to us. That is the whole message of Shmois, because the concept of a name is a paradoxical concept that illustrates exactly this point. The Shaykhs von a Nomen to mention was struck dem Nomen, gefindt men zwei Ketzoves. When you analyze the relationship between a person and their name, you'll find there's an incredible paradox. Von einer Seite sagt man, als der Baal Hashem zu sich allein nötigt sich ein ganzes nicht in einem Nomen. On the one hand, I don't really need a name in order to be me. So if I'm alone and nobody ever refers to me by name, it's okay, I'll still be me. Why do I have a name? So that you can get my attention, so you know how to refer to me. Which indicates that a person's name is very superficial compared to the person, on the one hand. Und erfahren können wir von einem Namen nicht haben kein Begriff von dem Mohus von dem Menschen, was ruft sich mit dem Namen. And the truth is, because a name is essentially a tag, by knowing somebody's name, I don't really know the essence of who they are. V'horaya, what's the proof? Sein and fahren mehrere Menschen mit demselben Namen. There can be many, many people sharing the same name. And people sharing the same name might be radically different people. Because again, a name is a tag. It's not a reflection of the essence of who we are. It's not like light and the source of light, where if you can analyze the light, you can get a sense of what the source of the light is about. So if we analyze sunlight, we may have an insight into how the sun operates. If you analyze a person's name, you don't have an insight into who they are fundamentally. On the one hand, but on the other hand, for the zweite Seite is du hast den Namen von der Menschen hat Shaykhus zum Etzem Adam. On the other hand, we know that your name does have some kind of a link straight to the core of who you are. In fact, your name touches a part of yourself that is actually beyond your incredible intellectual or emotional assets. I will prove it in two ways. And when you call somebody by name, you get the entire person's attention. The whole person turns in your direction because somehow you've spoken to the essence of who they are. You've elicited the essence of the person. And then a better or even stronger example. When a mensch God forbid a person passes out, was das meint, dass nefesh is in a matzes punis almos and is abgetrogen von gilei haguf. Now, if a person passes out, that indicates that the neshama is not so invested and linked to their body in the normal way, in the healthy way. So there's a disconnect between the neshama and the body. How do you re-engage the neshama? How do you rouse the person? You call their name. It's incredible. So the neshama is kind of switched off. And how are you going to reactivate it? Call the person's name. Those are proofs of the fact that while the name might just simply be a tag, it's not just a tag. It's a hyperlink directly to the core of the person's neshama. And the name is powerful enough to re-engage the energy of the soul back into the body by calling the person's name. And that is actually an advantage to a name over light itself. Yes, if you analyze light, you have an insight into the luminary that produces the light, but but no light will ever be able to transmit the essence of the luminary. It will only be a radiation from the luminary, whereas here the name is able to link to the source of the person. Das heißt, als der Ätzem von dem Modem drückt sich aus Dafke dort, wo es setzt sich nicht in gültige Scheiches zu Menschen. So there's the irony. The essence of a person is achieved or reached or activated Dafke without experiencing the revealed parts of the person. So the person's out for the count, and yet their name can speak to their essence. But Dugma Vigret Friraznim in the Maidas Avodah von Zman HaGolus, this is exactly aligned with how we explain the greatness of how we commit to and serve Hashem during Golus. As the Etzem von Eden werden es skala dafke in dem Hellen Wester von Zman HaGolus, that the time of Golus, where you don't see our incredible insight into godliness, and you don't see our great passionate commitment to Hashem as you had in earlier generations, and yet what do you see? That somehow our essence is revealed. So that's the meaning of the word Shmois, and why Shmois is the perfect name to describe the parasha of Golus Dafka, because Golus is that paradox. And Al Pi Kol Hanal is moving the keshet zwischen Meiser v'Seirasa v'Avidasim from Balei Lula mit the parasha Shmois dienen from Golus, which brings us back to why the Alter Rebbe's passing, which culminates all of his avodah in teaching and spreading Chassidus, is specifically linked to parasha Shmois, the parasha of the paradox of Golus. Because we know very well that just as there's the Yechida ultimate essence dimension of the Neshama, within Torah itself there's also the essence dimension of Torah, which is not Kabbalah, it is Chassidus, and we'll see in a moment why it's specifically Chassidus. And the Ike Gila von Bechinas Yechida von Torah is in Chassidus Chabad. And where do you most access the Yechida dimension of Torah, the essence of the soul of Torah? In Chassidus Chabad specifically. Because what the Alter Rebbe achieved with Chassidus Chabad was to take these incredibly infinite concepts, powerful concepts, and translate them into language that the rational mind could process and understand. With the objective to be able to have a meaningful impact both on the Nefesh Abahamis and on the physical world in which we live. And that effect should be so profound that we totally do a 180 and transform the nature of both our Nefesh Abahamis and the world, because that's when you know that you're dealing with the essence of Torah. And the essence of Pnimiyas Torah, when you can take the lowest and transform it to become the highest. What does that mean? Das heißt, by mentioning exactly as we've described with the person, the paradox of the person's neshama. As these galas from Yechida etzem and neshama, that in order to reveal and access the essence of the neshama, Yechida, is dafka when die koiches agloyim sein in a matze fun helen vehester. Dafka, when do you access the deepest part of your neshama? When the more, so to speak, exciting parts of the neshama seem to become unavailable. You don't have that depth of understanding. You don't have that profound emotional attachment to Hashem. A similar thing happens with the deepest part of Torah, the Yechida in Torah. As you've heard in Iskala Dafka, dann wenn sie darf auftauen in die Madregas Tachtonis von Nefesh Abahamis v'Chelke be'olam. When will you access the deepest part of the Torah? When what you have to deal with is the most removed from holiness and from Torah, the most mundane and physical elements of this world. But the Piskum from Balei Lula, as the Alter Rebbe himself said, Kol inen Chassidus Hashanis Teves midosav, that the whole objective of Chassidus is to transform the nature of a person's midos, meaning to say the nature of those midos is quite mundane and worldly, and Chassidus comes along not only to stymie the negative midos that we have, but to transform the lowest midos to become holy. And das ist die nekuda meshutefas from Meiser, Teirasev, Avidasim, from Balei Lula, or Meidas Avodah in Zman HaGolus. That's the common denominator between Chassidus, the Alter Rebbe's life work, and the Avodah in Golus represented by Parashat Shmois, because in beide tut sich auf die Galus von Bechinas Yechida Dafka in einem Ort was ist Mushel von Giloi Or, because both Golus and Chassidus Chabad share the same objective, which is to reveal the essence of Torah or the essence of the Neshama in an environment which is not conducive, Golus or the lowly world in which Chassidus should impact and transform. Das ist Yadua, Sidaga in Avoida und Avoida von Balei Lul is Merumas in sein Namen Shner Zalman. Again, the Rebbe has spoken about this previously, that you can see the Alter Rebbe's work reflected in his name. Shner is Miloshain Shnei Or. The first name of the Alter Rebbe represents a double light. And Zalman is Osius Lizman. Zalman is the same letters as for time, which is a factor of this world. It's a construct of this world. Und beide nehmen zusammen drücken aus dem Chibur von Schneer mit Zman. So therefore, Schneer Zalman, as the double-barreled name of the Alter Rebbe, implies exactly this paradoxical state of bringing both degrees of light into a world that is finite and restricted by time. Der Bir in dem Schneer meint, wie der Baal Shem Tov hat gesagt wegen dem Alter Rebbe. So the meaning of the double light, which the Baal Shem Tov referred to with regards to the Alter Rebbe, as if bei Leichen die Welt mit die zwei Lichtigkeiten, indicates that the Alter Rebbe's objective was, and his mission in life, was to illuminate the world with two lights. The licht von Torah Saniglo, licht von Torah Sanistar. The light of the revealed parts of Torah, Halacha, and the light of the hidden parts of Torah through Chassidus. But that's not where it ends. Und der Aufruf von Schneer in ein Wort is, so the fact that these two different styles of Torah learning come together in a single world, as beim Alter Rebbe is given the schlimmste Chibur von Niglo und Nister bis es seinen geworden Lachot im Mamish, doesn't just mean that the Alter Rebbe broadcast on two channels, one which is a Nigla channel, one which is a Nista channel. It's Shnei or a single word. That means to say that the Alter Rebbe created the perfect harmony between the world of the esoteric and the world of the exoteric. Was der Keach of dem ist gekommen davor, how does a person have the capacity to be able to meld together two worlds which are effectively completely different to each other? It's because the Alter Rebbe is not operating in the stage where different parts of Torah are distinct from each other. He's operating in the essence of Torah, where everything is obviously a single essence. Yechida Shabbat Torah, the Yechida dimension within Torah. Was is Hech von alle Gedorim von Helen Begiloi. That is a dimension of Torah which is completely beyond the concept of either being revealed or being concealed. And therefore it's the concept Ashlishi. It is the third dimension that is able to harmonize and to put together what should by nature be contradictory realities. Not only did the Alter Rebbe succeed at this high, almost academic or spiritual level in harmonizing a world of the hidden parts of Torah with the world of the revealed parts of the Torah, but he brought that down into Zman, meaning it's one of the key constructs of this world. The world is defined by time and space. Time is an incredibly limiting element that we have no control over, and so therefore it represents the helem of this world that hides. Hashem is obviously beyond time, so it hides Hashem from us. Which means that the Alter Rebbe's objective is that in the lowest world, the most confined world, the darkest world, what should be completely accessible and revealed? Shnei Or, the dimension of Torah that unites the different elements of Torah. It's only in that way and at that point that we're able to reveal the essence of Torah. As we've already pointed out, when are you revealing the deepest dimension? When you're reaching the lowest levels. In our Art was you're touching and reaching, influencing and transforming a part of the world that would never be able to relate to, nor would the Giluyim be able to relate to them. Now, the Rebbe has discussed numerous times. It's the ultimate purpose of all existence is that even those dimensions which are completely beyond the created reality and completely beyond our reality, anything that is completely beyond us, ultimately the objective is it should become part of us and therefore expressed in our normal day-to-day experiences of mind and heart. And therefore we're supposed to get to a point beyond how it is now, where our intellect and our emotional attachment to Hashem is perhaps hidden. Yes, it's true that to be in Galus and to serve Hashem with Mesiras Nefesh is amazing. It's got a tremendous advantage. Because it awakens the deepest part of our neshama, and that's incredible. But is the Chabad the Tachlis from Galus? Nobody would ever argue that, great as the Galus might be, that's the purpose. Rather, the purpose is the Geula was kommt nach dem und durch dem. The ultimate purpose is Geula, which follows and results from the Galus or our Avodah in the Galus. In other words, das heißt, the goal is that this incredible experience of our inner self, the core of our neshama, for mention should be something that illuminates and guides how our minds work, how we relate to Hashem in terms of our character, in terms of our feelings, etc. Each one of them should be completely saturated with the awareness and reality of the Etzem HaNeshama. And that is the Alter Rebbe's achievement in teaching Chassidus Chabad. That as Etzem Pnimius HaTorah, what the Alter Rebbe succeeded in doing is to take the very essence of the deepest parts of the Torah, which is completely beyond the structured reality of creation, completely beyond the rational mind. It's so deep and so profound that you would imagine actually the only way to access it would be with either very mystical learning, or just emunah. You believe in Hashem. You have to believe that these things exist because you can't process them rationally. What did Alter Rebbe achieve? The goal and the achievement of Chassidus Chabad is these highly sublime, profound, abstract concepts should be things we can actually learn and understand. And understand in such a way that it actually transforms the nature of our behavior, the nature of our character, the nature of our emotions. It's only that we should have a meaningful passion for Hashem and a true awe of Hashem. That's why we point out over here that the Alter Rebbe passed away motzei Shabbos Kodesh. It's interesting because the Gemara tells us if a person passes away Erev Shabbos, it's a good sign for them. Motzei Shabbos, not so much. And the Rebbe points out that maybe not for them, but the Rabbeim were focused on the legacy and impact that they would leave us, how they would transform us. And so therefore the Alter Rebbe would rather pass away, so to speak, on a motzei Shabbos where the work week is beginning, to empower us to go out there and work and to make this difference. It's early out of Parshas Vayera. It's now the beginning of the first day of the week of Parshas Vayera. But you don't yet see clearly that we're in the time of Vayera. Vayera is going to talk about true revelation of Hashem. A name of an experience of godliness that even the others didn't have. As Rashi tells us that up until this particular point in time of Parshas Vayera, the Eibishter had never revealed to anybody, even the greatest tzaddikim, his truest self, so to speak. The name Vayera, it means things which are revealed and open. The Alter Rebbe passing away at motzei Shabbos Shemos, which is all about our avodah of activating the Yechidus Shebenefesh and Yechidus Shebetorah to transform and totally change the world, something which is beyond us, something which we should never be able to appreciate, we should never be able to understand. Through Chassidus Chabad, that Shemos becomes Va'era. It becomes something that we can see and that we can experience and that we could relate to in a highly personal way. That is the objective of Chassidus Chabad. And of course, as we know, Chassidus Chabad will prepare us to greet Mashiach Tzidkenu, the ultimate Giloi Elikus, the ultimate Giloi of Yechidus Shebenefesh, Yechidus Shebetorah should happen, Takef Umiyad Mamash.